Revenge, Book 2 in the New World series. Written by Stephen Llewelyn and performed by Chris Barrie.
The next day saw a new energy among the crew, everyone determined to get to grips with their situation and put everything in place for when the inevitable confrontation came. Lieutenant Hiro Nasaki joined Doctors Thomas Wood, Jim Miller, and Satnam Patel in the pod's manufacturing bay. He chose his company well, as their next task was to design structural frameworks capable of supporting the new world. Structural engineer by profession, Thomas Wood's presence was a given, and despite his background in chemistry, Jim Miller headed the team whose job it would be to manufacture the frames. Satnam Patel was an astrophysicist primarily, but his place on the Triumvirate Council allowed him to take a keen interest in anything that might affect the ship's safety, something that also rested heavily on Hiro's mind. In the first instance, the subsoil was woefully inadequate to support such an immense mass, especially after a recent storm and flash flood that left her listing to starboard. The slight pitch in the decks could be felt, and Hiro's call to action suddenly gathered support that had been entirely lacking just a week before. Flow of vehicular traffic through the main cargo bay doors was once again possible, but despite clearing several tons of soil, the construction and engineering crews remained concerned that, left unchecked, the ship might continue to sink. Under the belly of the New World, there were heavy support plates, close to each landing strut. They were designed to carry the ship's weight and could even be used as jacking up points should the landing struts require repair or maintenance. The engineer's strategy called for just such a use. The struts themselves were currently buried several meters into the earth, so soft was the soil, leaving the support plates touching the ground. By excavating down to bedrock around the struts, they intended to make room to build 4 structures capable of supporting a quarter of the ship's mass each. However, normal procedure required that, prior to any of the 4 struts being raised, the vastly heavy pod should first be removed. Although this remained an emergency option, their current circumstances made the operation difficult and dangerous. Originally, Miller had argued for relatively lightweight units, capable of being moved from one jacking point to another, but the mathematics proved that anything strong enough, yet built from steel alone, would be too costly in material. Bearing in mind their limited resources, the idea had been scrapped. Subsequently, the engineers decided on 4 squat, heavy-duty steel lattice frames, designed in concentric box-like configurations. These could be lowered into the excavations and, once in place, shuttered and filled with a strong concrete grout, tamped and vibrated to remove any air pockets. Some steelwork would be left jutting from the edges facing each landing strut, so that once retracted, further reinforcements could be lowered and connected to the projecting steelwork, ready for secondary piles to be poured alongside. This way, the whole bulk of each support pad could be bound together into one structure. Once cured, the new concrete would allow the hydraulic rams supporting the ship on her landing skids to be lowered onto a solid base. Eventually, and in stages, they hoped to create a stable 4-point landing pad, robust enough to carry the ship without the risk of moving her. Regardless of the century, the scientifically minded have always fed off ideas like hungry hippos, and almost immediately a second plan began to germinate. We could build 2 more similarly massive monoliths. Hiro gesticulated, as he stole the eraser from Miller's jealous grasp and cleared a space on the lightboard. If we build them within cofferdams, they could support a bridge across the river, allowing ground vehicles much more freedom of movement across the plains. His proposal was shot down immediately. Miller, as self-appointed lightboard monitor and guardian of the pod's material stores, snatched back the eraser and replaced Hiro's idea with a scribbled design for a bridge made from renewable sources. He was just about to add a basic representation of the superstructure when Patel brought them all back to the problem with the ship. Any one of the 4 men present was eminently capable of solving their problems structurally. However, despite the adage that 2 heads are better than 1, it seemed that 4 heads doomed their designs to remain but doodles on a light board, continually augmented and rubbed out again by bickering engineers. Baines walked calmly onto her bridge. It would take a while to get used to that. Her bridge. Indeed, she fervently hoped they would get Douglas back before she had to. She greeted Singh with a good morning, as she always did, and made herself a cup of coffee, as she always did. Singh liked to start his day with a cup of English breakfast tea. Noting that the lieutenant's favourite mug, the one emblazoned with the Delhi Daredevils cricket team, was not by his station, Baines poured him one. Stepping out of the bridge's small galley with a steaming mug in each hand, she looked up to find Singh grinning from ear to ear. Already suspicious, she asked, "What?" He thanked her for the drink before spilling the beans. "As we have Commander Gleason on the bridge, to begin his intensive systems training this morning, I thought it would be nice to make him feel at home. Especially as India, captained by myself, of course," he gave a slight bow, "absolutely humiliated Australia in the opening overs of the test match we started last night in my hollow room. So I made these, to make it up to him, so to speak." He reached under his desk to pull out 2 pieces of apparel. Baines stared at the items of mischief for a stretched moment before her shoulders began to shake, followed by a shuddering laugh and even a few unbidden tears. Singh was unable to prevent himself from guffawing alongside her, and their deep medicinal laughter drove away some of the darkness. Baines wiped her eyes, looking intently at the lieutenant. "Thank you, Sandy. I needed that more than I knew." "We both did, Captain." Singh bit his lip for a moment, adding earnestly, "We will get him back, you know. Captain Douglas is as tough, as the British say, as old boots." Baines smiled at his kind attempt to cheer her. "Yes, but until then, I'm going to keep his seat warm, his crew frosty, and his whiskey at room temperature." "He doesn't take ice?" "Hates it. Says it ruins the scotch." The door chimed. Singh opened a window at his workstation, displaying the camera feed from the corridor outside the bridge. Baines had insisted security remain at the highest level in case the bad guys had not entirely left the ship. However, the camera merely showed the newly promoted Commander Gleason standing in full view and requesting permission to enter. Singh unlocked the door. "Morning, Commander." Baines and Singh greeted simultaneously. Gleason strode in purposefully, nodding to each in turn. "That's going to take a little getting used to. G'day." "Believe me, you're not the only one feeling it," Baines assured him. "But you've proved your courage and leadership time and again already on this mission, and I know I'll be able to rely on you in this. Obviously, due to our circumstances, yours will be a position of leadership, and dare I say it," she almost drum-rolled for effect, "administration." Gleason's face soured. Baines smirked. "Naturally, I won't require or expect you to fly the ship, but you'll need to know your way around. Specifically, you'll need an understanding of her resources, capabilities, strengths, and weaknesses, so you can make the calls when necessary. Make no mistake, they will be back, and we will be attacked." "You make it all sound so easy, Captain." Baines smiled. "You've got a week's grace to get up to speed, and then I'm going to need you, Commander. I intend to begin sending out reconnaissance groups to search for our shuttle and, most importantly, Captain Douglas." "Sooner the better, Captain, so I can give you this job back." "We're on the same page there, Commander, trust me. Anyhow, today, Sandy is going to help you learn your way around the bridge and bring you up to speed on our plans to train as many pilots as possible for the 10 escape pods we have. I want you to learn to pilot them too. Have you ever flown?" Gleason pulled a face. "Only simulated. As you know, all military and construction staff on the mission were given basic training to pilot the escape pods and the small shuttlecraft they use on Mars. which are similar. He shrugged. That's all I have. Sorry. No need to apologize. Fortunately, you'll not find a better man in any period to complete your training than Sandeep here. She grinned mischievously. His piloting skills are second only to his fast bowl, I understand. Gleason nodded slowly. Right. So that's my first lesson, is it? Bain's eyebrows rose innocently. Get to work before you two? And before you've had a chance to gossip? He declared, his tone rising at the end, making a question out of a statement after the Australian way. Baines chuckled, patting him on the hand. So glad you're a fast learner. Gleason sagged. You know, you've had me lawyering, now I'm going to be administering. When do I get to blow something up? Funny you should mention that. Baines picked up a tablet, opening a suite of schematics. Patel's team have begun work on some large-scale, stunning weapons designed for mounting to our ships. She included Lieutenant Singh in her gesture. And I want you two to get the escape pods kitted out with them, alongside your efforts to train pilots, of course. Gleason smiled for the first time. Now that I can do. Great. But before you start, Sandeep has done his best to make the bridge feel a little more like home for you. Gleason glanced around. Nothing jumped out as overly familiar. When he turned back to query his fellow officers about what he must surely be missing, he saw them. Both Baines and Singh wore hats bearing numerous corks that dangled from strings beneath their broad brims. Baines grinned again. What do you think, sport? Gleason blew out his cheeks in a theatrical sigh. I suppose a transfer's out of the question. You may recall, Baines retorted, that there are only 2 ships in the whole world right now, and one of them is in the thrall of a despotic madwoman. Gleason nodded. That would be this one, right? At Hero's request, Dr. Portree had her construction crews out in their diggers and tippers, working the riverbed and near bank. The heavy machines dredged up bucket after bucket of sand and gravel to form the ballast component of the new concrete the chief required for his structures. The pod carried many tons of cement and structural steel, originally earmarked for construction and mining purposes on Mars, so they would soon be able to begin. They would eventually require survey teams to locate lime and gypsum deposits for replenishment, but it was early days yet. The 10-person security detachment, under the watchful gazes of newly minted corporals Dowie Jones and Jennifer O'Brien, closely monitored the situation. O'Brien, already one of Major White's staff before the new shake-up, was renowned for her stern attitude towards discipline, danger, and duty. Over the past few weeks, this quality had earned her the clumsily ironic moniker of Iron Balls. Yet despite her scrutiny, a relaxed routine had settled over the work crews and their security counterparts, much to O'Brien's irritation. The machines moved to and fro, hauling many tons of ballast back to their compound, when the texture of the river seemed to change. O'Brien noticed it first. She stared hard until it became clear that what she was looking at were dozens of fish sliding by, just below the surface. Some of them were huge, maybe 2 or 3 meters long. Swimming upstream, almost salmon-like, they powerfully disregarded the adverse current, a similarity that made her wonder if these giants also made their way back to the place of their birth to breed, perhaps to a pool or lake as yet unknown to the recently arrived humans, when as quickly as they arrived, they were gone. Back on land, the large fires burning around the worksite worked well to discourage the wildlife for a while, but hunger is one of the most powerful forces in nature. Unsated, it can even attenuate fear. Violent turmoil, erupting from the hitherto calm waters around one of the excavators, introduced shock to the systematic and controlled human operation, a shock that immediately led to panic. O'Brien could only gape as huge jaws broke the surface to lunge, lightning fast for the digger in the shallows. The bridge comm binged urgently. Lieutenant Singh here. Go ahead. Lieutenant, this is O'Brien. We have an animal incursion, some sort of giant crocodiles. In the background, the bridge crew could clearly make out the hollers and screams of their people in trouble. Baines looked to Gleason. I haven't even tried the chair out yet, Skipper, he complained. While the formidable yellow machine sat in the shallows, scooping great bucketfuls of gravel from the riverbed to deposit them on the back of a waiting lorry, its driver sang loudly and off-key. Historically, site workers have always done this, so prehistorically, there was no reason to expect anything else. However, when a set of 2-meter-long jaws launched from beneath the river's surface, raising barely a ripple of warning, the singing turned to swearing. The giant crocodile struck the man's cab with stunning speed, crumpling its protective framework slightly, as 2 similar creatures snapped at the machine itself. This second attack injured the attackers, but also caused damage to one of the tracks. The operator, understandably rattled, tried to reverse out of the water, but the damage to his running gear caused the tractor to spin right, while remaining more or less in place. Finding himself even deeper in the water and effectively crippled, he attempted to steady his breathing and nerves. A professional driver of some years' experience, he reacted intuitively, swinging the house of his machine and dropping the bucket arm into the bank, digging in. At an offset angle and working in tandem with his remaining track, he pulled towards the shore. The machine jerked in the desired direction, but then began to twist and skip. His first attempt at movement had taken him to the edge of the very hole he had been excavating under the water, and the violent twisting and bucking only caused him to slide into it. His machine now listed dangerously, and dug in as he was, he had no choice but to give up on the idea or risk going over. Trusting instead in the build quality of the machine, he waited for help. His 12-meter-long attackers slunk back into the water, unsatisfied, but sensing their quarry was in trouble, rallied again for a second run. Long, snaggle-toothed jaws gaped to reveal a maw almost 4 meters high as they renewed their assault. Although the lorry was no longer being loaded by the stricken machine, its driver was yet to notice. His attention was focused on an e-zine article, while he listened to music through earphones. He jumped and nearly threw his expanded comm out of the window when Corporal Jones banged on it, bellowing, "Wake up, Pencock!" Jones and 2 other security personnel, a man and a woman, climbed up onto the back of the steel-sided tipper, shouting for the driver to reverse into the shallows and back towards the stranded digger. "Don't fire at them in the water," Jones ordered. "A high-voltage charge could fry the machines." 40 meters away, Corporal O'Brien saw what Jones was up to and nodded approval, ordering her 6 remaining officers to also jump up into the second lorry's load bed. Once certain they were safe, she climbed up into the cab of the other 30-ton earth mover and squeezed in behind its driver. Her plan proved workable against the low-slung crocodilians, and she let out a sigh of relief to calm herself. Unfortunately, before she could come up with her next move, the whole nature of the attack took an unexpected turn. The view from the wooden Palisades wall walk was breathtaking on such a clear spring morning. Lazing with a picnic, Tim Norris's friends Henry, Rose, Woodsy, and Clary peppered him with all sorts of questions about the creatures and plants they saw. Woodsy took a swig from his cup. "Now this is how I like to watch work happen." He sighed contentedly as he observed the comings and goings at the river's edge, but no sooner had he said it than their situation went instantly from paradise to paradise lost, leaving the people out there, their people, suddenly fighting for their lives. "Sarcosuchus harty?" Tim queried the air in disbelief. At once horrified and fascinated, he raised a hand to shield his eyes from the bright sun as he leaned unthinkingly on the palisade for a closer view. Already the teens could see that one of the excavators was in trouble, although the driver still appeared safe for the moment, protected within the reinforced defensive structure designed by Woodsy's father. Another devastating crash rang across the plain as the largest crocodile hit the house of the digger again, and still the structure kept the man inside alive. "Whoa, Dad," Woodsy spoke in reverential tones. "You're good." He was watching the soldiers scramble up into the back of the lorries to escape the crocodile's reach when he spotted movement from the corner of his eye further down the shore to the west. Gleason ran down to the pod's armory to meet Major White and the Sarge, who were already gearing up to take a team outside. "Congratulations on your promotion." The Sarge slapped a stun rifle into Gleason's hands, keeping an almost straight face. The Australian's response was muffled as he donned his body armor. Sergeant Jackson grinned. Gleason was his kind of bloke. "I wish we'd got the shuttle," White lamented. "Tell me about it," Gleason bit out as his head popped through the top of his vest. He gestured generally outside. "We were just talking about bringing the escape pods into service not 5 minutes ago, and now this. There's a personnel carrier in the compound, fully charged and ready to go," the Sarge announced. "I had it prepped in case we needed to sally out in a hurry." "You must be bloody psychic, mate." From Gleason, this was a compliment. Picking up his rifle once more, he turned to leave. "Not really, Commander," Jackson replied knowingly as they set off together, running for the main hangar. "In this place, all you need to do is plan for the very worst thing that could possibly happen ever. That's the number that comes up every time." Another 4 giant crocodiles swam towards the skirmish. 2 of them crawled out of the water and up the shallow bank to snap at Jones and his companions as they stood in the tipper bed on the back of the lorry, frustratingly close but just out of the predator's reach. The remaining pair diverted back into the flow as the river began to boil. Rather than a function of temperature, this was an effect created by the monstrous shoal making its way upstream. If they were to join the small advance party that swam by a few minutes earlier, this larger group would have to run the gauntlet. The Basque of Sarcosuki, mostly hunting the waters, were now warned and waiting for them. The riverbanks were also coming alive, as other interested parties appeared from the forests and even the air. The crew from the New World seemed to be witnessing a local calendar event, and O'Brien could not help wondering if her people might provide dessert to follow the fish course. A terrifying bellow rolled across the clearing behind her. She turned as best she could within the restricted space of the second excavator's cab, and gaped. Yet more new players were joining the game, and changing it. Clary screamed. All the teenagers froze, jaws dropping at the nightmare unfolding before their eyes. All except Rose. She shook the boys frantically, asking, "What can we do? Anyone?" Tim shook his head, unable to process. "What can we do?" he mumbled, doubling up on the question. The ferocity of these living, breathing, fighting creatures shocked him. He was perhaps the most prepared person on the ship, yet seeing them for the first time, undiluted by narrative, film, or holograph, was visceral. "Oh, crap," he concluded. "Henry!" Rose grabbed her boyfriend, shaking him more fiercely than the rest. "There must be something we can do." The young man hardly seemed to notice, so she looked around for inspiration and saw it. "Can you drive that truck?" Down in the compound was a large 4-wheel drive people carrier. Rose turned Henry's head roughly and pointed at it. "Can you drive it?" Sure. What are you thinking?" he answered distractedly, barely able to tear his gaze from the melee at the river. Woodsy tugged on Henry's sleeve and pointed dumbly towards the latest band of intruders approaching from the west. Eventually, he found his voice. "Those blokes and Sheilas in the tipper are going to get it, guys." Henry turned to follow his friend's gaze, scanning the riverbank. And sure enough, there were the newcomers, swimming strongly to the shore. Leaving the water, they did not crawl in the sprawling gait of Sarcosuchus. Rather, they used their powerful upright hind legs to launch themselves over land. They covered the last few hundred meters at speeds no crocodile could ever hope to match. Certainly too fast for any human beings caught out in the open. However, the principal concern for the men and women crouching on the backs of the lorries was the head height of these latest arrivals. They were a good 3 or 4 meters above the ground. "What the hell are those?" Henry shouted, beginning to panic. "Two-legged crocodiles?" "Two-legged, sprinting crocodiles, mate," Woodsy corrected, feeding on his friend's fear. "And I've seen them before, in one of Tim's video nasties. They're Irritator Challengery, they are." Corporal O'Brien pointed out the incoming Irritator threat to her driver and ordered him to intercept them. He looked at her in disbelief. "Intercept? This is a digger gen, not a jet fighter." Pointing out of the windscreen, she shouted, "Get in front of that lorry! Those guys are dead if we don't do something right now!" The operator shook his head but relocated his 30-ton earth mover without further comment. Its rate of movement was painfully slow, but they only had to crawl 10 meters, whereas the 8 Irritators still had several times that distance to run. He managed to plant the machine in front of the team, exposed at bite height, just as the hunting pack arrived. The animals swerved and bobbed around them in frustration as he swung the bucket erratically, dangerously. They were quick for their size, so this motion failed to score any direct hits, either with the dipper or the bucket. However, the yellow-painted metal monster from another world did cause them to shy a little, and this provided an opportunity. The soldiers seized it and began firing their stun rifles, but with everything in motion, it was difficult to get a clean shot. They especially wished to avoid hitting their only protection with a high-voltage shot that might fry its electrics, so their effectiveness was also limited. This no-score draw whipped the Irritators up into a frustrated fury. They let go an agitated cacophony so thunderous that the terrified people in the back of the lorry were forced to release stock and trigger to cover their ears. White, Gleason, the Sarge and their troops burst through the outer hatch of the personnel airlock and staggered almost comically to a halt. "Turkish delight!" the Sarge bawled at the top of his lungs. "Where the hell is it? Someone's nicked the damn truck!" Henry drove faster than skill and sense prescribed, faster than he really believed he could. Bouncing the heavy vehicle across rough ground, masked by thick ferns, he ploughed in to rescue people he hardly knew from dinosaurs. "I hope you know what you're doing," Tim screamed from one of the rear seats. "Hell no," Henry called back as the 10-ton personnel carrier's rugged tires tore up the soil. "You're going to turn us over, mate," shouted Woodsy, terrified. "I know what I'm doing," Henry called again. "You just said you didn't." "I sort of know what I'm doing, okay?" "Great. So I will only be sort of killed when you get it wrong, then." "Will you just shut the Watch out for that tree stump!" Rose screamed. "Front door, Woodsy. You're making me crash." "You're doing that all on your own, mate." "Ah!" The truck jumped again, and Woodsy bounced, banging his head. "Where did you learn to drive? A pay-per-view simulator?" Henry slammed the brakes on in an attempt to regain control. The cabin was full of vibration and clatter, as the powerful anti-lock brake system worked with clever onboard electronics to compensate for the incompetent at the wheel and save everyone's lives. They pulled alongside the lorry with 6 stranded soldiers on the back and opened a hatch in their roof. The driver of the tipper lorry had bravely stayed where he was. Hiding low, out of sight, he knew the only protection the 6 people behind him had from these much taller invaders was provided by the extraordinary skill of the digger driver in front of them. If he moved away, they would lose that protection. The animals were furious but fixated, and as Henry drew up along the opposite side of the lorry, they failed to notice them at first. The security team saw their chance immediately, jumping onto the roof and in through the open hatch. Once inside the personnel carrier, Private Davis threw himself into a seat behind the designated driver. "Turn us around! Go, go, go!" After a double take, he asked, Hey, kid, didn't I arrest you last week? Henry booted the accelerator, and the truck lurched forward as the drivetrain's electrics tried to fulfill his desires and find some traction in the mud and vegetation. Without taking his eyes from their course, he called over his shoulder. Pete? Pete Davis, that you? Didn't you hear? I beat that suspected terrorism rap. And as this is only Grand Theft Auto, I was thinking maybe you could just give me a fine or something? Tim gave an embarrassingly feminine scream. Ah! Hey, watch the road! I wish there was one, dude, Henry retorted hotly. The Irritators were much quicker off the mark than the personnel carrier. Encircling the tipper lorry, they ran straight into Henry's path. The animals may not have noticed the teenagers' arrival, but they certainly noticed their quarry disappearing into the belly of this new adversary. Rose screamed as one of the creatures lashed out, snapping like a crocodile at the windscreen. Another animal jumped at the side of their vehicle, then another, forcing Henry to stop or tip over. The force generated by these one-ton predators as they launched themselves at the truck's sides set it swaying to the full range of its impressive off-road suspension. Rose screamed again, joined by everyone else as the vehicle shook ever more violently. If you want to live to pay that fine, kid, get us out of here! Davis bellowed. Henry gunned the powerful electric motor once more, knocking one of the dinosaurs aside in a desperate attempt to escape. The driver of the recently vacated lorry also hit his accelerator, causing the 32-ton eight-wheeler to shudder and jump into action like an angry bull. He aimed for one of the animals buzzing the rescue vehicle, a vehicle he had just realized was being driven by a kid, and knocked the hapless creature down, crushing it mercilessly under his machine's colossal weight. In his rear-view mirror were dinosaurs, pterosaurs, and archosaurs, monsters hitherto beyond his imagining, and all of them drawn to the feast en masse. A blood-curdling dissonance of calls, roars, and screams followed them. Almost out of his wits, he slammed his palm on the wheel and bawled at the truck's also bovine Martian drivetrain while he waited for it to deliver the power. Left behind, O'Brien urged her kidnapped digger driver to approach Jones, still on top of the other lorry by the river. They were suddenly within a little island of calm, the fracas moving away to chase the departing vehicles. In the brief respite, her driver began to shake as shock replaced adrenaline. Nevertheless, he nodded and set his jaw, even as he set the machine crawling forward. The teenagers' appropriated personnel carrier drove side by side with the escaping lorry. Together, they cut a swathe through the plant life, enraged carnivores close behind, snapping at their rears. Soldiers stood in the open gateway to the palisaded enclosure, watching balefully as the trucks drew closer. Gleason pondered. Lorries jumping and crashing flat out through rough terrain, followed by ferocious killer dinosaurs. More calmly than he felt, he glanced between White and the Sarge. Does anyone else think we should start running? That would seem appropriate, sir. The Sarge replied. I'm glad you mentioned it. Proportional response, I'd say, White added. Give the order, Sergeant. Leg it! The Sarge bellowed, and their small detachment ran like hell, heading back to the ship at the speed of fright. Nerve-jangling screeches came from the river as giant pterosaurs wove and dove overhead, hunting the smaller Piscine quarry. Some of them in turn fell victim to the waiting Sarkasuki as the crocodiles returned to the easier prey in the water. There were so many fish now that even a Diathinkisaurus would not have left empty-handed. The Irritators also realized that there were easier pickings to be had back at the river and peeled off, abandoning their pursuit. What were those things? Asked Davis. Irritator challengeri, Tim supplied automatically. A smaller cousin of Spinosaurus aegyptiacus, he added for good measure. We thought they favored a fish dish.
I suppose we can confirm that now, as they've gone back to the river. Looks like they're quite partial to other things as well, though, doesn't it? Like us, for example.
One of the soldiers in the back of the personnel carrier kept watch out of the rear windows. He suddenly called out,
"Hey! They're heading back towards Jonesy! We need to turn around!"
Henry checked his mirrors. They were indeed heading towards the lorry where the Welshman was still attempting to help the digger operator out of his stranded machine.
"Hang on,"
he said, trying to keep his nerves as well as the vehicle under control. He spun the wheel, turning in the smallest arc he could achieve. Plant life and clumps of earth flew everywhere as the vehicle's computer redistributed power to each wheel, preventing them from kicking and fighting against the tight turn. Gracelessly, but doggedly, the truck completed its maneuver and accelerated back to the riverbank. Henry took a deep breath and let it out. At least the flattened ferns made the going easier to see, if no less lumpy to traverse. The bigger lorry carried on through the open gates into the compound, eventually skipping and squealing to a ragged stop in front of a pair of huge but resolutely closed steel doors. Jones leaned over the rear of the tipper's lorry load bed, checking the ground and then the water behind them. Between them, the three soldiers relayed information back to the driver as his rear-view cameras became submerged in the river. As the huge machine backed into the shallows, Jones felt like he was locked in a surreal, slow-motion dream. The clincher was the repetitive, "Warning, this vehicle is reversing." The Sarko-Suki did not appear overly concerned by the monstrous thing creeping towards them, issuing polite requests to make way. However, they did start to take an interest as the juicy titbits on its back, ever just out of reach, moved closer to the waterline. The driver of the crippled excavator had continued to fend them off where possible, though the angle of the machine made any extreme maneuvers perilous. Eventually, he was forced to plunge the bucket down onto the riverbed to prevent himself from rolling over into the hole he had dug whilst removing ballast. He had been about to move a little further downstream, away from the hole, just as the attack happened and cursed bad timing. If he tipped over completely now, it would simply be a matter of being torn apart or drowning. The only thing he had going for him at this point was that his cab door now faced the slowly approaching corporal. A huge Sarko-Suka snapped at Jones, making him dive once more for the protection of the lorry bed's steel sides that he wished were a little taller. They were now very much within the reach of these killers that even the dinosaurs feared. The man in the digger almost collapsed with relief when Jones' head poked back up, but turned sharply when deep guttural grunts sounded from the water behind him. Two smaller Sarko-Suki were approaching his position from deeper water, both with mouths wide, ready to renew their attack. They had all partaken of the fish, so he could only surmise that they saw his machine as a threat to their territory. Faced by this anger of archosaurs, Jones could only wave for the stranded driver to remain where he was, while backing off himself. Every time he approached, the crocodiles came on. Out in the river, the shoal survivors had mostly passed by, leaving only stragglers and as yet unclaimed corpses. Fortunately, this meant there was a general quieting around them, as many of the predators began to fade away, hoping to devour their kills in peace. Unfortunately, the remaining Sarko-Suki, the diehards as it were, now gave Jones their full attention.
"Lush!"
the Welshman commented sarcastically.
"Any ideas?"
he asked the man and woman standing behind him. As they pondered, the hatch on top of the lorry's cab opened, making them turn. The driver popped his head up.
"What now, Corporal?"
With surgical precision, the hugest of the three remaining Sarko-Suki took advantage of that moment's distraction and attacked. With a gargantuan effort, it jumped onto the back of the lorry, throwing all three people to the deck.
"Get us out of here!"
screamed Jones. The driver dropped immediately, but was unable to help them. Such a colossal weight landing suddenly on the back of the load area made the lorry jump, causing him to slip and crack his head hard against the hatch. Luckily for him, he fell into the relative safety of the cab. Unluckily for the others, they were now stranded, a bare metre or two from the snapping maw of one of nature's most successful, time-proven predators. When the personnel carrier drew alongside, completely unlooked for, Jones made a mental note to offer up a prayer of thanks at the earliest possible opportunity. But at that moment, there was time only to jump. The personnel carrier's roof hatch opened again, with helping hands raised to drag the 3 petrified souls inboard. "What about the drivers?" someone asked. The lorry next to them was bucking and swaying as the enormous beast on its back thrashed wildly to get either forward or off. It was beached. Jones thought frantically when an ear-splitting roar filled their entire world. With immense effort, the Sarcosuchus used all the power of panic at its disposal to drive one final spasmodic leap, and keeled over backwards into the water. It disappeared under the surface immediately, rolling right way up as it did so. One furious thrash of the tail, and it was gone. Displaced water crashed over the vehicles in a wave, drenching anyone under the personnel carrier's still open roof hatch. The passengers cried out in shock and anger, a cry almost instantly stifled as the all-encroaching roar grew louder. "What the hell is that?" Jones shouted, covering his ears. "Shut the damned hatch!" bellowed Davis, putting words to action as he leapt for the control panel. The closing of the hatch dulled the high frequencies, but the rumble was now making the whole vehicle tremble, and so loud that no one could hear anyone else. The first lorry to escape made it all the way back to the ship, but instead of safety and relief, the driver found only Gleason and the Sarge standing before locked doors. Jumping up into the cab, they asked him to consider the unthinkable. When he told them what he thought of their request, they insisted. After a hasty 3-point turn, they drove back out of the compound, heading once more for the fiasco at the river's edge. On their approach, they saw a woman and 2 men, one of them the unmistakable bulk of Corporal Jones, leap across from one vehicle to the other. Before they had time to celebrate this good fortune, they were overwhelmed by a ground-quaking roar. Covering their ears, they looked up, scanning for its source. It was not hard to find. The driver pulled up, almost subconsciously, as all 3 men stared slack-jawed into the sky. Any threat posed by the monsters at their gate paled into insignificance as a vast shadow fell across them.
Revenge, Book 2 in the New World series. Written by Stephen Llewelyn and performed by Chris Barrie. New installments are uploaded weekly. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave a like or comment. Visit the link in the description for free New World companion stories, available for download as ebooks.